Hello, I'm Alex Couch. I'm the lead product designer here at Parabola. And I wanted to talk about a flow that's a little different than our usual. At work at Parabola, we obviously use Parabola for a good number of things. I mean, it's a great data tool to do a lot of things, but especially to automate routine tasks or to go through complex processes where you might be combining data and things like that. But I actually also use Parabola for another use case outside of work, that is running advanced stats for college football games. So today in this video, I wanted to talk about that use case and then what its final output looks like, how I used to calculate and assemble this, which preview, it's a bit of a nightmare, and then how moving this process into Parabola has really helped me in general, but has helped me save time and reduce errors and helps makes this process so much faster. So let's get into it. I write these articles each week during football season for college football games, especially for the Alabama Crimson Tide, which is a lot of fun, Roll Tide. And in these, I break down some statistics that are beyond the normal box scores and things like that. And then I visualize and write about all these advanced stats in here. I'll just hop over to a little data sandbox over here, or excuse me, a data visualization sandbox that I spin up. So all of these charts are built in chart.js, which is a great tool in and of itself. I'm not really going to talk about chart.js or about that visualization per se in this video, but looking at all of these different charts, you can see that there's a lot of data at play here. There's this over time data. There are maps, dot plots, aggregated information that goes into things like mostly column charts, and also a few bar charts that are horizontal down here. And this is a lot of fun to put together and to talk about and write about each week. But it takes a lot of rows of data and a lot of custom calculation to calculate things like SR and XR, which, for those of you that don't know, is success rate and explosiveness rate. They're basically advanced statistics for football plays and for teams and games that are not just things like total yardage accrued or very basic statistics that you might see in a box score. Anyway, I've been doing this for several years, and how I started out doing it was several different versions of this giant spreadsheet that I would use. So even the last spreadsheet, the most updated one that I had, was really big. It was this set of calculations that spanned many columns and many rows that had to be run for every single game. And I'll get back into this tab, but prior to even having any of that data, would have to go scrape from the ncaa.gov website or from somewhere else the play-by-play data that I needed, paste it in and upload it to my GitHub, and then actually draw it back into a spreadsheet using a import XML command here. So that was this very manual process that I had to do every single time I wanted to pull a new game's worth of data in. And even within that, by the way, there were still errors and things that I had to resolve. From there, I ran all these calculations here using actually a helper table full of a bunch of little micro tables that help run some of the formulas that you'll see in just a moment, and then broke these games and broke all these plays down with all of these different calculations and all of these formulas that, believe me, took a long time to just get through and write each one, to validate each one, to make sure that it was doing what it was supposed to do. And it was a bit of a nightmare. So you can even start to see right here that there are just some gargantuan formulas in here that took time to figure out how to write, and it took a lot of spelunking, where you go and you look at how different people solve problems, and sometimes you just copy paste things and you don't even know exactly what it's doing, to be honest, but it seems to resolve the problem that you've got. So to calculate this custom data set that I had, to calculate these custom metrics that we wanted to calculate, it was a huge cascade of really incredible, really headache-inducing formulas. So every week I would run the charts off of this process, take a bunch of time to do that. And then honestly, a lot of the times in the final charts, you'd see some errors, or you'd see something that didn't really make a lot of sense. And so I'd have to come back into this and really dig my way through all of these formulas, dig my way through all of this processing to see what happened there. And it really wasn't very clear at first. Having all of your logic hidden here behind these individual formulas and this cascading logic is really, really challenging. And I know that a lot of people that work in Excel professionally are really good at that, and they can Spelunk in and they can use best practices and all that, but this is really, really tough. So before I joined Parabola, or right when I was joining Parabola, I revamped this process. It was the off season, and I was getting ready to get another season's worth of games on the board. And so I did what I often do in the off season and revamped a little bit of the cycle. And this time I put it all into Parabola, which is so exciting. And it's gone through a few iterations even by itself, but the process and how it looks right now is kind of like this. So I'm obviously zoomed out right now, but just showing everything that we just looked at is captured here with a data import, a bunch of processing that takes the base information and actually breaks it down, calculates all the metrics and distinctions that we need in a way that's all very traceable and very organized. So things still do go wrong sometimes with the data, but I can come back in here and I can figure out exactly what happened. I can go into an individual step, look at the before and after, and make sure that the thing that I thought was going to happen there was going to happen. And sometimes you'll see literal errors that'll show up in Parabola when something went wrong, and sometimes you'll just have to go in before after wherever that thing happened. And so having it organized like this as a traceable process saves me so much time, so much time. Another hidden bonus that Parabola gives creators like myself is for a non-developer like me, somebody who's not very sophisticated with writing in things like JavaScript or pulling from databases and writing in those kinds of languages. I'm not very good at working with APIs on my own, but Parabola actually allows me to tap into a new data resource that an API that's out there publicly on the web that I hadn't really been able to access on my own. You saw earlier that spreadsheet with the scraped data that I would use to actually get what I need to run these tables. And instead, I can just come into here in Parabola. I can set up this endpoint for collegefootballdata.com, and it'll even spit out automatically, and then I can adjust from here all the parameters that help me say, okay, it's this type of season, postseason or regular. It's this season or this year, this team, and which week it is. So this already represents a huge time savings for me each week, just being able to access an API without writing my own custom code to do so. And pull it right in here and just get into work. Once that API data is in, it did take some time to build out this flow, but it took a lot less time than it took to do the same thing in a spreadsheet. And like I mentioned earlier, it's much more traceable, much more sensical. It's much more modifiable. It's gone through versions where I can clean up the logic, where I can simplify things and hone it down and get it to be more efficient. And I still have more ideas for how to do that with this flow. So anyway, I just made some updates to this one, actually. As you can see, it breaks down the different evaluations and different charts that you end up seeing at the end, and runs those calculations and fixes little things where it needs to. Finally, we combine all that data back together, and believe me, for a parabola flow, for a data analysis, this is a pretty complicated report, and I'm probably not being as efficient as I can be, if we're being honest, but this is how it makes sense to me. Eventually, all this stuff gets combined. And then every game that I run like this will go into a big list full of games, and it'll deduplicate itself. So it'll say, if this game already exists, make sure to erase whatever those cells are first, and then repopulate it with whatever refreshed version of that game was coming out of this flow. That's so that when I fix things, it'll make sure that I have the latest version always there in that all games table, and then I'm actually sending them to Parabola tables as well. So some of the updates I've been making lately have been around emerging features that Parabola has made in the last year about tables and table views and seeing these things in an organized place elsewhere. So let's go take a look at that. I'm going from the draft view here to the what's currently called the live view. And this is where I can actually run this flow every time I want to update it with a new game or with a new correction, or if I want to change the workflow a little bit or change these tables. So here you can see tables and their views broken down right here in Parabola, where I don't have to create space for them, or I don't have to create a filter function in Excel, or create a chart for them to live in elsewhere. They actually can just come in here and I can filter them as I want to. So I have a bunch of views here off of a table of data. It's how each team did in this last game for success rate and explosiveness rate. You can see that I highlighted those here. We've got quarters analysis, which is for each team. How did they do in each quarter? Success rate, explosiveness, the basics there. Rushing and passing. We've got that red zone analysis. You probably saw some of these charts earlier when we were looking at the actual visualizations, but even just having this here helps me evaluate whether or not the data is making sense and get a quick read on it before I actually go and change the files that I work in to accommodate this new game and to visualize this information as a new game with all of its new, colors and everything. Another one down here we have is the player charts that have the top rushers, passers, and receivers for each based on the types of plays that they contributed to. And then I've just got a few giant tables of all the data that I'll be passing through to my data visualizations when I go and bundle those things up and publish them online. So this has been a really exciting development, both using Parabola in the first place and some of these emerging features that we're using for me to do some pretty complicated data work for what's otherwise a pretty simple editorial format. So it's been a really exciting thing to build in Parabola, and I can't wait for some of the emerging things that I'll be able to do with it in the future, like running more and more games even faster and like running more games even faster and I'm especially looking forward to the future of Parabola, where we can accommodate use cases like this even better and make it possible to run even more and more complicated analyses and borrow logic from flows into other flows and share these things out with other people. So I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into Parabola and how it's used sometimes in really interesting ways. Thanks.